It's funny how the biggest moments in your life, the ones that leave the deepest scars, often start in the most ordinary way. They don't announce themselves with a crash of thunder or a dramatic swell of music. They creep in on a Tuesday afternoon, disguised as a bad decision or a random detour. For me, it started with a map, a failing heater in a beat-up Ford Granada, and the kind of stubborn argument only a young, married couple can have. This was back in the late fall of 2003. My wife, Anna, and I had been married for about 2 years. I was trying to make a go of it as a freelance writer, which is a polite way of saying I was mostly unemployed and racking up rejection letters. We were living in a tiny apartment in Denver, and we were broke. Not just eating ramen for dinner, broke, but praying the check for the rent clears, broke. We'd taken a trip out to visit her cousin in Utah, hoping a change of scenery might shake some inspiration loose for me. It hadn't. The whole trip was a bust, and the drive home was shaping up to be just as miserable. The heater in our old Granada had given up the ghost somewhere in the Utah salt flats. And now, as we climbed into the Colorado Rockies, the temperature was plummeting. The sun was a pale, watery disk behind a thick blanket of gray clouds, and the wind had a bite to it that went right through the car's thin metal shell. We were both tired, both irritable. I was driving, and Anna was navigating, her finger tracing a line on a worn-out Rand McNally Road atlas. "We're not going to make it back to Denver tonight, Mark," she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "It'll be pitch black soon, and they're calling for snow at the higher elevations. I don't want to get stuck on the pass." She was right, of course. But admitting it meant admitting we'd have to spend money we didn't have on a motel room. I just grunted in response, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "There's a town coming up," she said, squinting at the map. "Estes Park. Looks like it's right at the entrance to the national park. We can find a cheap motel there. Get an early start tomorrow." Estes Park. The name sounded pleasant enough. I pictured a little mountain town with a few cozy, wood-paneled motor lodges, maybe a diner with a neon sign. It sounded better than freezing to death on Berthoud Pass. "All right," I conceded. "Estes Park it is." The drive up was beautiful in a stark, intimidating way. The aspens had already lost their leaves, leaving behind forests of skeletal, white trunks that looked like bone. The mountains loomed over us, huge and indifferent, their peaks already dusted with the first snows of the season. The road coiled and twisted, and with every turn, the world felt a little older, a little wilder. And then we saw it. As we came around a bend, the valley opened up, and there, perched on a hill overlooking the town, was this palace. It was enormous, a sprawling white building with a bright red roof, looking like something plucked from a Gilded Age fantasy and dropped into the middle of the rugged wilderness. It was the Stanley Hotel. "Wow," Anna breathed, pressing her face against the cold glass of the passenger window. "Look at that place." I was just as stunned. It was the most magnificent, out-of-place thing I'd ever seen. It didn't belong in our world of cheap gas and failing car heaters. It was grand, it was imposing, and as we got closer, I could see that it looked empty. Many of the dozens, maybe hundreds, of windows were dark. "Let's just see," Anna said, a rare spark of spontaneity in her voice. "Just for fun, let's see what a room costs." It was a terrible idea. A place like that was so far out of our league it was laughable. But I was tired of saying no. I was tired of being practical and broke. For one night, I wanted to pretend we were the kind of people who stayed in places like that. "What the hell?" I said, turning the car onto the long, winding driveway. "Let's be tourists." The moment we stepped into the lobby, the sheer scale of the place hit me. The ceilings were impossibly high. The wood was dark and gleaming, and a vast, empty fireplace stood like a stone altar at one end of the room. The air was still and cool, and smelled of old wood, beeswax, and something else, something like dried flowers and time itself. The silence was the most profound thing. It wasn't just quiet, it was a heavy, weighted silence, the kind that absorbs sound. Our footsteps on the polished floor seemed sacrilegiously loud. A lone clerk, a young man who looked like he was barely out of his teens, stood behind the massive front desk. He seemed startled to see us, as if we were the first people he'd spoken to all day. "Can I help you?" he asked, his smile a little strained. We were hoping to get a room for the night, I said, trying to sound casual, like this was something I did all the time. The clerk's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Pity? Folks, you're lucky. Tonight is our last night of the season. We close down for the winter tomorrow morning. He told us they had one room available that was already prepped for a VIP who had cancelled at the last minute. Because it was the end of the season, and because of the cancellation, he could give it to us for a shockingly reasonable price. It was still more than we should have been spending, but it was a deal we couldn't pass up. A strange little thrill went through me. The last guests, the whole enormous hotel, all to ourselves. It felt like we were being let in on a secret. It's one of our best, the clerk said as he handed me an old-fashioned, heavy brass key. Room 217. I remember joking as we walked towards the grand staircase. Think it's haunted? Anna laughed and squeezed my arm. As long as the ghosts don't charge extra for room service, I'm fine with it. We were young, and we felt like we'd won some kind of lottery. We had no idea what we were walking into. We didn't know that some secrets are kept for a reason. Room 217 was less of a room and more of a suite. It was huge, with a sitting area, a 4-poster bed, and tall windows that looked out over the mountains. The furniture was antique and heavy, the kind of stuff you see in museums. It was beautiful, but there was an odd feeling in the air, a static charge, a sense of being watched. I dismissed it as my imagination, fired up by the grandeur and the emptiness of the hotel. We dropped our bags and decided to explore before dinner. The hallways were the first thing that really got to me. They were incredibly long, carpeted in a faded, intricate pattern. Brass light fixtures cast a dim, golden glow, creating deep pools of shadow. With every step we took, the floorboards beneath the carpet would issue these soft, mournful creaks. It felt like the hotel itself was groaning under our weight. The place was a maze. We found the music room, with a grand piano sitting silently in the center, its keys covered. We wandered into the billiards room, where the tables were draped in thick canvas sheets, looking like sleeping, prehistoric beasts. We were the only 2 people there, but it didn't feel that way. I kept getting the feeling that we had just missed someone, that if we turned a corner just a little bit faster, we'd catch a glimpse of someone ducking into a doorway. The air was thick with the memory of people, of laughter and conversation. But all that was left was the echo. As we were heading back to our room, Anna stopped. Did you leave the suitcase on the bed? She asked. I shook my head. No, I put it on the luggage rack by the closet. Why? It's just, I could have sworn I saw it on the bed when we left. We got back to the room and, sure enough, my beat-up canvas suitcase was on the luggage rack, right where I'd left it. Anna shrugged. Weird. Guess I'm just tired. That was the first red flag. A tiny one, so small you could brush it away like a piece of lint. A trick of the memory. Nothing to worry about. We were the only patrons in the cavernous dining room that night. The staff, a single waiter who looked as old as the hotel itself, treated us with a kind of solemn formality. As we ate our ridiculously expensive steaks, I heard it, the faint, tinkling sound of a piano. Just a few scattered notes, delicate and thin, drifting from the direction of the music room we just left. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Did you hear that? Anna was looking down at her plate. Hear what? A piano, I whispered. She cocked her head, listening. I don't hear anything, Mark. It's probably just the wind. This old place must be full of drafts. I tried to let it go. She was right. An old building groans and settles. The wind plays tricks. But the notes I'd heard hadn't sounded like the wind. They sounded intentional, melancholy. Later that night, the feeling of being watched intensified. Anna, exhausted from the drive, fell asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow. I, however, was wide awake. My mind was buzzing. I was a writer, and this place was overflowing with atmosphere. I pulled out my notepad, thinking I could channel the eerie vibe into my work. I sat in an armchair by the window, the lights of Estes Park twinkling far below like a handful of scattered diamonds. The only sounds were the soft breathing of my wife and the low moan of the wind outside. And then, a new sound started. It came from the floor above us. The 4th floor. It was the sound of running. Not a frantic, panicked running, but a light, joyful, pattering sound, the sound of small feet. It was accompanied by the faintest whispers of giggling children. My blood ran cold. Every rational part of my brain screamed that it was impossible. The clerk had been clear. We were the only guests. The staff for the night consisted of him and the old waiter, both of whom were, I assumed, on the ground floor. The hotel was closing. The rooms above us were empty. I stood up, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. I walked over to the door of our suite and pressed my ear against the thick, cool wood. The hallway was silent. Of course it was. But I had heard it. I was sure of it. I told myself it was the pipes. It was the heating system. Some ancient radiator clanking to life. But it hadn't sounded like pipes. It had sounded like children playing. I went back to my chair. But the spell was broken. The creative buzz was gone, replaced by a low-grade, humming anxiety. The silence of the room now felt predatory. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, darker. Every creak of the building made me flinch. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted into a restless, shallow sleep. And that's when the nightmare came. It wasn't like a normal dream. It was hyper-realistic, more vivid than my waking life. In the dream, I wasn't myself. I was looking through the eyes of my own son, Leo, who was only 4 at the time and safely back home in Denver with his grandmother. In the dream, he was here, in this hotel. He was running, his little legs pumping furiously down one of the impossibly long hallways. The carpet was a smear of red and gold beneath his bare feet. He was crying, gasping for air, filled with a kind of pure, animal terror that only a child can know. He was being chased. I could feel his panic, his desperation. He didn't dare look back. But I, the dreamer, could hear what was behind him. It was a slithering, dragging sound, a wet, heavy, scraping noise. And then I saw it. Coiled on the wall was one of those canvas fire hoses, the kind you see in old buildings. But it wasn't on the wall anymore. It had detached itself. And it was alive. It moved like a thick, red serpent, its brass nozzle glinting in the dim light like a single, malevolent eye. It was slithering across the patterned carpet, gaining on him, relentlessly. It wasn't just chasing him, it wanted to hurt him. The intent was palpable, a wave of cold, ancient malice. The hallway stretched on forever. He was getting tired. The hose was getting closer. I could hear the hiss of it now. The sound of water pressure building inside its canvas skin. The brass nozzle rose up like a cobra's head, ready to strike. I woke up with a violent gasp, lurching forward in the armchair. My body was drenched in cold sweat. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. The room was dark and silent, except for Anna's steady breathing from the bed. It was just a dream. A terrifying, awful dream, but just a dream. My writer's brain, overstimulated by this place, had cooked it up. That's all it was. I took a few deep, shaky breaths, trying to calm myself down. The images from the nightmare were seared into my brain. The terror in my son's imaginary eyes. The snake-like movement of that hose. I stood up to get a glass of water from the bathroom. And my foot bumped against something soft on the floor. I looked down. One of Anna's sweaters had fallen off the chair. As I bent to pick it up, I noticed something else. The door to our suite was open. Just a crack, maybe an inch. I froze, every muscle in my body going rigid. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that I had locked that door. I had not only turned the knob lock, I had thrown the deadbolt. I was fastidious about things like that, a habit born from living in a cheap apartment in a sketchy part of Denver. My gaze traveled from the cracked open door down to the floor. And there, on the faded floral carpet, just inside the threshold of our room, was a small, dark, wet patch. It was roughly circular, no bigger than a silver dollar. And it was slowly soaking into the fibers of the rug. It looked exactly like the spot where you might rest the nozzle of a dripping hose for just a moment. Time stopped. The air in the room became thick and heavy. Impossible to breathe. The line between the nightmare and the waking world didn't just blur, it shattered completely. The terror from the dream wasn't imaginary. It was real. It had followed me out. It had been in the hallway. It had opened our locked door. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat had closed up. I moved with a kind of slow, robotic terror. My eyes fixed on that wet spot on the floor. I backed away from the door, my hand reaching out behind me, searching for Anna in the darkness. My fingers found her shoulder, and I shook her, hard. "Anna," I hissed, my voice a dry, rasping thing. "Wake up, get up, we have to go." She mumbled something, half asleep. "Mark, what is it? What time is it?" "Now," I said, my voice cracking with a panic I could no longer contain. "Get dressed. We are leaving right now." There must have been something in my voice, a raw terror that cut through her sleep-fogged brain. She sat up, and I could just make out the silhouette of her in the moonlight. "My God, Mark, what's wrong? You're shaking. Don't ask questions. Just get your stuff, please." We threw our things into our bags in a frantic, clumsy rush. We didn't turn on the main lights, using only the dim glow from the bathroom. I felt like turning on the lights would be an invitation, that it would show whatever was out there that we were awake and aware. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep. Every moan of the wind was a whisper. The silence from the hallway was the most terrifying thing of all. It was an active, listening silence. I grabbed our bags. I took one last look at the room, the grand, antique furniture, the moonlight painting stripes on the floor, the dark, wet spot by the door. Then I took a deep breath, grabbed the doorknob, and pulled it open. The hallway was empty. It stretched out in both directions. A long, silent tunnel of dim light and deep shadow. It looked exactly as it had before, but now it felt fundamentally different. It felt wrong. It felt hungry. We didn't run. Running felt like it would provoke a chase. We walked, quickly and silently, my hand gripping Anna's so tightly my knuckles were white. I didn't look left or right. I kept my eyes fixed on the grand staircase at the far end of the hall. It felt like the longest walk of my life. The air was cold and heavy, pressing in on us. I could feel eyes on my back, hundreds of them, from the closed doors, from the paintings on the wall, from the very air itself. We finally reached the staircase and practically stumbled down it, the sounds of our panicked descent echoing in the huge, silent lobby. The teenage clerk was asleep in a chair behind the desk, his head lolled back. We didn't wake him. I threw the heavy brass key onto the counter. It landed with a loud clatter that made him stir. But we didn't wait to see if he woke up. We pushed through the heavy front doors and ran out into the biting pre-dawn cold. Our Granada was the only car in the vast parking lot. It looked small and pathetic. But right then, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It was our sanctuary. We threw our bags in the back and jumped inside, locking the doors immediately. I jammed the key in the ignition, praying the old engine would turn over. It sputtered, coughed, and then, mercifully, roared to life. I didn't bother to check the rearview mirror until we were back on the main road, heading out of Estes Park as fast as I could without drawing the attention of the local police. When I finally did, I could see the Stanley, high up on its hill, its white facade glowing faintly in the twilight. All of its windows were dark. It looked like a giant, sleeping beast, and I had the sickening feeling that we had just escaped from inside its dream. We drove the rest of the way to Denver in near total silence, the sun rising behind us. Anna knew better than to press me for details. She could see the state I was in. It's been over 20 years since that night. Anna and I are still together. We have Leo, and another daughter now. We have a nice house in the suburbs, a reliable car with a heater that works. Life is normal, stable, safe. But something broke in me that night. I never finished that novel. The experience didn't inspire me, it paralyzed me. For years, I couldn't sleep in a hotel. To this day, if I see one of those canvas fire hoses on a wall, my heart starts to pound and I get clammy. A few years after our stay, I was in a bookstore and I saw the paperback cover for The Shining. I'd never read it. I picked it up and read the back cover. A writer, an isolated hotel in the Colorado mountains. The last guests before the hotel closes for the winter. I bought it and read it in one sitting. And when I got to the part about the fire hose in the hallway coming to life and chasing the little boy, I had to put the book down and go outside. I felt sick. I went online and started researching. I learned all about Stephen King's stay at the Stanley in 1974. How he and his wife were the only guests. How they stayed in room 217. And how he had a nightmare about his own young son being chased down the hallway by a fire hose. A nightmare that became the seed for his entire novel. I found forums and articles about the Stanley. Stories about the ghosts of the original owners. Stories about the phantom piano player in the music room. Stories about a housekeeper in room 217 who unpacks guests' bags for them. And stories about the fourth floor, which used to be the servants' quarters and nursery, where people still hear the sounds of children running and laughing in the empty halls. My experience wasn't unique. I had just stumbled, blindly and naively, into a place with a long, dark memory. We weren't the stars of the show that night. We were just the latest audience for a performance that has been running for a very, very long time. We were the last guests of the season. The very last. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm the only one awake, I find myself thinking about the clerk who checked us in. I think about him locking those heavy front doors the next morning, sealing the hotel up for the long, cold winter, and I have to wonder, when he turned that key, was he sure that we were the only ones who had left?